the record button. Bear with me here for just 1 second. Okay, so this is Ed Crow. I'm going to get us started. A couple quick things before we get going. We do these webinars every Wednesday and Thursday at 1 o'clock, various topics. For example, the Insulin Savings Program is something I've been familiar with and talking about for a while. It's really critical for agents to know it, but I really never thought about doing a webinar on it. So that was an idea from an agent. So I really appreciate that. I think it's a great topic to talk about today. And on Wednesday and Thursdays, we usually will go over Medicare topics. Sometimes we'll sprinkle in other products as well, since we work with all lines of business, but usually focus on Medicare. So anyway, this was a good one. Appreciate that. So if you're not getting our invites for our webinars Wednesday and Thursday, just call our office. The email could be going to spam. If you want to watch a future webinar but you're not available, if you just register, you'll get the recording. So we send the recording out to everybody. So just register. You'll get the recording later on in the day after we do the webinar. So if you can't make it, you can listen to it when you want. Lastly, if you have questions, I will gladly answer those. I'll usually wait till the end. So just send them into the webinar, into the question section, and then I will try to answer them at the end of the presentation. So today will be about 15 minutes, I would assume, and I think we'll get us started. So we're going to talk about the Insulin Savings Program. We'll talk about the program, the types of insulin, the types of injectables that are covered, companies that participate in the program, not all of them do, and then using Connect for Medicare. I wrote C4M, but Connect for Medicare, which is one of our two online enrollment platforms, Connecture and Sunfire. But today, I'll show quoting this on Connect for Medicare. Okay, so about the program. The Insulin Savings Program, that's not the official name. It's kind of what we mostly know it as. It was a program started in 2021. The official name is the Medicare Senior Savings Model, SSM. And more or less, what it does is it caps injectable insulins at $35 per month. That $35 cap is applicable to all 4 stages of a drug coverage phase, and we're referring to Advantage plans and Part D plans. So you take, I'll show you the example, but you take Novolog, it's going to be $35 during the deductible, during the copay phase, during the donut hole, most importantly, and then during the catastrophic phase, it'll be $35, or if the actual price in catastrophic is less, then it would be less, of course. So applicable through all the phases, and again, plan deductible would not be applicable to this because it's capped at $35. This is for Medicare Advantage and PDP plans, and the key I think you'll see is not all companies participate in this. What makes it tricky is they tend to participate by company, by state. So some companies will participate with it in some states with some plans and not in other states, which makes it a little tricky, but that's why we're going to show you the demonstration of Connect for Medicare. It makes this all really easy because you can just see the results and see what companies do participate with it. As I mentioned, depends on company, plan, and state. Some companies will cover different types by state as well. So one plan might cover Humalog on a certain plan in a state, but the variation, the version of that plan in a different state might only cover Novolog under the $35 savings program. But again, Connect for Medicare will make that easy for you to see. This will not work on generic versions of drugs. So what you'll tend to see is on Connecture, Sunfire, even on the Medicare Plan Finder, you'll put in like Humulin, right? And it'll ask you if you want to use the generic Insulin Pro. Well, if you do, the generic for Humulin is pretty new. It's still very expensive. It's really not much less than Humulin itself. And it will not work with the Savers program. So that's a rare scenario where the person, if you're picking a plan that does participate with the Insulin Savings Program, it's one of the rare scenarios where you're better off using Humulin than you are using the generic of it, because the Humulin will be capped at $35. The Insulin Pro is going to cost more. It's going to be a tier 3 copay, even though it's generic. It's going to have the deductible, donut hole, all those things. So what are some common insulin types that are covered under this $35 savings program? So Humulin, as I mentioned before, don't use Insulin Pro, which is the generic. Lantus, I'll pronounce Tahio wrong. I think I just pronounced it wrong, but nonetheless, that drug. Levemir, Tresiba, Humalog, Novolog. Novolog is the other example. So there is a generic now for Novolog called Insulin something or other. You can see the name there. I'll definitely butcher that pronouncement and embarrass myself on the second part of the name. But nonetheless, don't use the generic drug if you're using a company that has the Savers program. It won't work on the generic. It'll only work on regular Novolog, the name brand. So again, there's all these insulins I just mentioned, these three, the ones before. Even the companies that do participate in the Savers plan will not apply it to all of those. They'll pick and choose which ones they're going to apply it to. So it doesn't mean that just because United, which they participate with the Savers program in most states, just because they participate doesn't mean they'll $35 cap all those drugs. They'll just pick various ones to $35 cap. So participating plans depends on state, but often the bigger name brand carriers that tend to participate in it are UHC, WellCare, and Humana. Notice I didn't say Aetna. That's because in most states they do not participate with it. I don't know if that's going to change for 2022. It may. One other thing to know, Humalog and Novolog, as most of you probably realize, do basically the same thing, and doctors, it's kind of hit or miss which one a doctor will prescribe to a patient. Rarely will a company on the Savers program be covering both of those at $35. It's one or the other. But that's really no difference between without the Savers program, when you put somebody on a MAPD or a drug plan, one of those they'll cover in tier 3, but not both. So usually they'll cover one, it is a tier 3. The other one's like a tier 4 or 5 and cost a ton more. They're just picking which one they want to cover. So something to keep in mind. Again, if you have questions, please just send them into the webinar and I will answer them at the end for you. Hopefully, anyway. Okay, so obviously, as we know, name brand insulin is very expensive. Some of the newer ones are, crazy expensive, but even the old standbys like Humalog, Novolog, I mean, there's still a lot. And with a couple of those injectable insulins, you're going to hit the deductible. You're going to have copays, but not for long, because even a couple of those will push somebody into the donut hole within 3 or 4 months. And then once they're in the donut hole, they're going to go from a tier 3 copay of say $47 to, and I'll show you an example, $130, $140 a month for each. So obviously, with the cost for the companies that participate in the Insulin Saver program, having the cost lowered to $35 for all through all phases can be a massive savings for people. It makes a huge difference. I'll give you an example of that on the next slide here. So I use Tresiba and Humalog as an example. Now, both those drugs tend to be part of the Savers program with various companies. So you could take Tresiba or Humalog, no deductible, $35 every month, the whole year. So Tresiba and Humalog without the Savers program, you'd have a deductible, it might be $455. You'd have the donut hole within a few months. And in the donut hole, and I rounded this off because it depends on where the carriers negotiated the price, because as you know, in the donut hole, you pay 25% of the cost, the negotiated cost. So Tresiba will go to $126 a month in the donut hole, and Humalog will be $135 a month. With the Savers program, they'd both just stay at $35 the whole time. So when you run this on Connect for Medicare, you'll see it makes a massive difference in the overall cost for the year for your clients. Okay, so we're going to use Connect for Medicare. That'll show you which Medicare Advantage and PDP plans participate in the cost for each medication. I'm using Connect today. When you work with us, you have access to Connecture and Sunfire at no cost, so you could use either one. I picked Connecture today because they have an insulin savings program button you can push. And when you push that, it will remove the companies that don't participate in the insulin savings program and just leave the ones that do. or you cannot push it and you can see the difference, between the ones that do participate and the ones that don't. Sunfire will basically do the same thing for those that prefer Sunfire. Sunfire does have some advantages in certain aspects, like on dual enrollments and things, but Sunfire will do the exact same thing. It just doesn't have the insulin savings button. I mean that's not a big deal, but you can't remove the plans that don't participate. But it'll be obvious when you look at it, just based on the overall cost. So I'm going to do an example using Connect for Medicare on the insulin savings program. This is where we get technical and I have to switch over to the website, which I usually screw up. Nope, I seem to be okay, so let's give it a try. So we're going to go to connectformedicare.com. For those who aren't using Connect for Medicare, you do need a username and password to get in. If you work with us, we'll just provide it to you. Just call our office or email us, and we'll get it for you. And that would be for either Connect for Medicare, or Sunfire. As you can see, you access them both right here. So for our purposes today, we're going to use Connecture. See how I'm doing on time. I'm doing well. Okay. I'm going to log in. I made a client called Insulin just for this. Insulin Savings being the last name. So anyway, I made this client ahead of time just so for our presentation today. So I've already loaded some insulins in this profile for Insulin Savings, so we can see what she is looking at for plans. So again, we could run this with Advantage plans, or if we want to do PDPs, click PDPs. But as you can see, now there's the Insulin Savings button. So right now, what this is showing you is all the plans, whether they participate in the program or not. If you click that Insulin Savings button, it'll remove the ones that don't. But let's start with this. So first of all, let's see what drugs I put in here. And let me show you quick. I think for this, I only put in a couple. All right, so I put in Lantus, Tresiba, and Humalog for the drugs. So let's go back for a minute. Okay, so when we look at the pricing, this is going to show you the estimated drug cost for the year. The total cost is because there's an algorithm in here that tries to estimate some medical costs as well. It's just made up. The drug cost is real based on what you put in the pharmacy you chose. So with United Healthcare, we can see those 3 insulins for the year. And this is for the rest of the year based on a June 1 or a July 1 enrollment rather. But for the year, it's $630. Since United participates in the program for those 3 insulins, they're all at $35. So again, it doesn't really matter which plan to too much of an extent. United $630 cost for the year. Then we go to Anthem. Anthem's $48.12 for the rest of the year for cost. They do participate, actually they don't participate in the Insulin Savers program, and only 2 of the 3 drugs are covered. So let me show you an example of that. So United, who does participate, they're all covered at $35 a month. Anthem doesn't participate, so as you can see, Humalog is going to be a tier 3. Lantus is as well, but that's meeting the deductible. And then Tresiba isn't covered by Anthem. So we can break it down by month, 46, 46, 610. These people are going to hit the donut hole July, August, 1, 2, 3, 4, in the 4th month, basically. And once they go into the donut hole, you can see Lantus suddenly, instead of being $46, is $112. Humalog's $140. Tresiba wasn't covered, but you'd see the same thing if it was. So the cost goes up substantially. Now, there's other companies that do participate in this program, but with them, and I'll give you an example here, like, for example, WellCare participates. So if we look, but you're saying, well, why is it $6,600? The reason being is WellCare participates in the program, but not for the drugs we put in, and then a couple of the drugs aren't in their formulary. So the program will only work if they've chosen that specific injectable insulin to be part of the program, and if it's in the formulary. So WellCare does this, but Tresiba isn't part of the $35 cap, and Lantus and Humalog are out of the formulary on the plan. So when we're looking at this thing, it becomes pretty obvious for this person that United Healthcare, based on those three insulins that they take, and this would change depending on the insulins they take and the state they're in the plan they use. But United, for my example in Connecticut that I ran using those three insulins, United hands down wins, because after that, everybody is just a tremendous amount more money, as you can see by the estimated drug cost. Again, you can run this. It's easy to see how it works. You can change the pharmacy. That won't really change things much. But that's an example of how it works. Now, I'll just click the button for you so you can see all the carriers here. Now, if I click the Insulin Saver button, suddenly then, it only left in the companies in Connecticut, in my county, that are participating in the program to any extent, and that is United and WellCare. Different states will be different carriers that participate, and they'll choose different insulins that they will have be and not be part of the $35 cap. But nonetheless, huge savings for your clients when you use this and match it up for them with the right program. Okay, that's pretty quick, about 18 minutes. Let's see if we have any questions about this. So if anybody sent any questions into the webinar, I'll answer them. Just briefly before we do that, tomorrow's webinar is going to focus on Medicare supplement spousal and family discounts and how you can run them on the quote site. Obviously, some companies are giving up to 15% spousal discounts, and you can on the quote site quickly see that, either on our quote site, on Connecture, or on Sunfire. So we'll go over that tomorrow at 1 o'clock. But for now, let's see if we have any questions. Okay, we have a few. Many insulin users will use Lantus and Humalog, one fast-acting, one long-acting. Will they cover at $35 for both? The answer is that some companies will. There are some companies that have chosen both Lantus and Humalog as part of the Savers program, so they're both at $35. There are some that haven't as well. So you just got to go on the quote system and quote it and see, and that will show you. When I have to run a quote, it looks like the coverage, catastrophic coverage, changes it to 5%, not $35. Is that right? Well, when you run it, it'll default to whatever the lower cost is. So if it's $35, it'll stay 35. If the 5% is less, it'll go to the 5%. Somebody said, unfortunately, AARP preferred PDP in New York is the only carrier that covers Humalog. No other PD plan in New York will cover it. I'll take your word for that. I haven't actually looked at that specifically myself, but again, I'll take your word for that. I've asked about this before. I get most webinar invites from you the morning of the webinar. Is there a way to get them a bit before? Sometimes I don't get them at all. I would say just call our office or talk to us about what email you want us to use. We send it out the day before and the morning of. Then somebody said the 5% was more. The 5% was higher, and that's what it shows as cost. No, usually, even in the donut hole, it'll be the 35, and when you run that on Connecture or Sunfire, it will reflect that. So I'm not sure specifically. I'd be happy to answer that offline if you want to, maybe answer it if you want to talk about it offline. I'm not really sure why that was happening in your example, but usually if it's 35, it'll stay at 35 if that's less, and it showed that like on the example I ran. The person said I'm talking about catastrophic coverage. Yes, I realize. But when I ran it, as you saw, even in the catastrophic level, it was still at $35. Actually, on mine, it didn't get to the catastrophic level now that I think about it. I don't know. I'd have to look into that for you. But, certainly I'd take that offline and I'd be happy to answer it for you. Do we have any other questions? Let's see. Those are good ones, by the way. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, then I would say I'll send out this recording today. Again, running these drugs now is really important to run it through either the Medicare Plan Saver or Plan Finder, rather, Connecture or Sunfire. So you can run the drugs. I'd recommend Connector and Sunfire because you have all the info then and you can save the drug lists. Versus if you do it on the Medicare Plan Finder, you can't enroll them through that like you can Connector and Sunfire. And they have to have an account to save the list. So, I would strongly recommend doing it through one of the platforms. And again, you can access those with us at no cost. So if we don't have any other questions, I'm just wasting some time here. Next question is there a way to go back to January on Connector? Yes. When you do the effective date of the enrollment, you would backdate it to January 1, and it'll run it for a year then for you. Good question. All right, looks like that's it for questions. I appreciate you joining me today. Thanks for coming on. Hopefully I'll see you on future webinars, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.